Welcome to Michael Potts F1, every moment from every Grand Prix. The 2025 Chinese Grand Prix from Shanghai. That was a very intense sprint weekend. There's so much to talk about, so let's dive on in. Oscar Pry won his third race of his Formula One career in what was our first sprint weekend of the year. Sprint weekends are always very intense. There is a lot more happening, and photographically speaking, you have a lot less time to capture everything. This always means that there's going to be some compromise. I'm going to have to choose one thing to focus on and one thing to miss. Generally speaking, I tend to not cover the sprint driver celebrations because in the past, these have been quite muted affairs. However, this was Hamilton's first ever win for Ferrari, and there was no way that I was going to miss this. And Lewis didn't disappoint. He celebrated like it was his first win of Formula One. And it was brilliant to see. Such joy and such happiness after winning the sprint races. I'm sure he would have preferred a feature race win, but still, getting any race win in a second Grand Prix for Ferrari is a massive achievement. There were a huge amount of Lewis Hamilton Ferrari fans, and they were ecstatic with the result. But it was a bit of a roller coaster weekend for Lewis. Having won the sprint, him, Charles, and Pierre Gasly were all disqualified from the feature race. Pierre and Charles for being below the minimum weight limit. This is a similar thing to what happened to George Russell at the Belgium Grand Prix, where the team set the car up to do a two-stop strategy and then adjusted it mid-race for a one-stop. I know that a lighter car will give a driver an advantage. However, it feels like we're penalising teams for making bold strategic calls, and it just doesn't feel right to me. A small tweak to the rule, where they weigh the car without the tyres on, or they weigh the car with a standard set of new tyres, might be a very good way of getting around this. No one wants to see a driver disqualified when the team has done something brilliant and made their race much more exciting. Hamilton was disqualified for having too much wear underneath his car, similar to what happened to him in Austin a few years ago, which was also a sprint weekend. And probably the lack of preparation time meant that Ferrari slightly miscalculated this. The one thing that's becoming abundantly clear in Formula One in 2025 is the margins between the teams are so small. It did look like at any point McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari or Red Bull were quick, which is making Formula One very, very exciting. And these tight margins and small differences between the team really make the driver's skills stand out. The rookies are continuing to make their progress and gain experience in Formula One. Kimi Antonelli claims bragging rights with a 7th place in the sprint and a 6th place in the feature race. But Ollie Behrman was one of the standout drivers for me. He did start way down in 17th, but he carved his way through the field, eventually finishing in 8th place, thanks in part to a few of the disqualifications. Isaac Hadjar was also very impressive, and he is getting very close to his teammate Yuki Tsunoda. Gabriel Bortoleto managed to finish ahead of his teammate Nico Hülkenberg in both the sprint and the feature race. Jack Dern struggled a bit, but he wasn't that far behind his teammate for most of the Grand Prix. But it was Liam Lawson that is continuing to have an absolute nightmare. He qualified last in both the sprint and the feature race. And while he did manage to make up some positions, the gulf between him and Max is massive. Now, Liam isn't a bad racing driver. He's very, very good. But the car that he's driving is so sensitive, which is why you can see the huge time difference in qualifying, where the lap needs to be precise the whole way through, and any mistake is unforgiven. When he was driving the Racing Bulls, that car was a lot more lenient. And it is a little bit unfair of Red Bull to put a junior who's had such limited amount of experience in Formula One into such a peaky car. A car that someone like Checo Perez, who is a very good racing driver, struggled to get the best out of. There's talk of them switching Lawson and Tsunoda for the Japanese Grand Prix. That does seem to be a very, very harsh response for Liam, but having another year under his belt in a car that's easier to drive may really help his confidence, and it might be more beneficial to him long term than a series of embarrassing Q1 exits. In this race, I spent a lot of time in the fan zones, and it was brilliant to see so many passionate Formula One Chinese fans. 220,000 people attended the race throughout the 4 days. But what's interesting about this track is that it has the largest capacity of any Formula One race. So if it was fully attended, it would break all records. So while the attendance was good, there's still a long way for Formula One to grow in China. And Formula One wasn't the only show in town. This weekend was the first race of the F1 Academy Series. This is the all-female race which replaced the W Series a few years ago. There are 17 regular drivers, and there's one space for a wildcard entry per race. And in China, it was local driver Shi Wai. 10 of the drivers are sponsored by Formula 1 teams, and those cars run Formula 1 liveries. The other 8 are sponsored by brands such as Tommy Hilfiger and Charlotte Tilbury. This is the third year of the series, and it looks like it's going to be a battle between Mercedes driver Dorian Pan from France and Ferrari's Maya Weg, who is Dutch, Belgium, and part Spanish. Over the course of the weekend, there are 2 races. The first is a sprint race with reverse grids for the top 8 qualifiers, meaning that 8th place starts on pole for this race. Maya took pole position in qualifying, and she managed to race from 8th to 3rd. A brilliant result. But it was in the feature race that Dorian Pan produced an epic move to overtake Maya around the outside. It was a truly audacious maneuver. The start had been complicated a bit because in one of the support races, some of the Porsches had dropped a lot of oil onto the start grid, and that meant that they had to start behind the safety car. It did create some quite cool photographs with these clouds of dust being thrown into the air as the cars drove past. The F1 Academy is a brilliant series and is a great stepping stone for young drivers on their way to Formula 1. Last year's winner, Abby Pulling, is now racing in GB3, which is a pan-European Formula 4 series, along with a few other drivers from F1 Academy. Doing well in that series will open the door to F3. Hopefully, in a few years, we'll see Dorian Pan pulling that outside overtake maneuver on Kimi Antonelli or Oliver Behrman. But back to Formula 1. McLaren did eventually finish the weekend on top. Oscar Piastri was the dominant of the 2 drivers, and it was interesting to see how well they're getting on at the moment, and they generally do seem to be benefiting each other. Both Oscar and Lando are pushing each other very, very hard, but in a very positive way, and that seems to be benefiting the team. Lando made a brilliant comment during the press conference that McLaren's success is down to their brilliant drivers. But it is just the start of a season where the McLaren seems to be the form car. If the season continues like this, it's not going to be long before we'll have a championship decided between the 2 McLaren drivers, and that is going to be the real test of this relationship. When Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg were both racing for Mercedes in the dominant car, it didn't take long before their lifelong friendship disintegrated as the prospect of being a Formula 1 champion emerged. Hopefully, Oscar and Lando can approach us slightly better than the 2 boys did over at Mercedes. Thank you so much for watching this review of the Chinese Grand Prix. I do hope you've enjoyed it. In the break, I'm finally going to get round to doing my Q&A video. So if you do have any questions about Formula 1 or photography or anything related, please do ask me in the comments below. If you'd like to see some more photographs from the race, there's a link in the description. And if you haven't yet, please do like and subscribe. I'm nearly at 10,000 subscribers. We have a gap now before the Japanese Grand Prix. I'm already in Japan acclimatizing, and we'll be sending out loads more Formula 1 content. So until then, goodbye.